Why does Europe seem to prefer a bad peace over a good war? It's a question that cuts to the very heart of the continent's modern identity. From Brussels to Berlin, there is a deep-seated fear, almost a historical allergy, to one thing above all else: the power vacuum. You see, while other parts of the world might see the collapse of a regime as an opportunity, a chance for a fresh start, Europe often sees the terrifying ghost of its own past. To understand this, we need to look back, not just decades, but centuries. Think about the fall of the Roman Empire. It wasn't just the end of an administration, it was the collapse of an entire world. Order, law, trade routes, a shared identity, it all crumbled. What filled that vacuum? Centuries of chaos, conflict, and fragmentation. The so-called Dark Ages weren't just a lull in history. They were the direct consequence of a massive power vacuum, an experience seared into the collective memory of the continent. Fast forward to the 20th century. After World War I, three massive empires, the Austro-Hungarian, the Ottoman, and the Russian, all imploded. On paper, this was the dawn of self-determination, a victory for nationalism. But in reality, it created a massive zone of instability right through Central and Eastern Europe. These new, fragile states, born from the imperial collapse, became pawns in a larger game. The power vacuums they represented were eventually filled, not by stable democracies, but by the aggressive expansion of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, leading directly to the most catastrophic war in human history. This experience taught European leaders a brutal lesson: nature abhors a vacuum, and so does geopolitics. And what rushes in to fill it is often far worse than what was there before. The post-World War II order was built explicitly to prevent this from ever happening again. The Marshall Plan wasn't just about rebuilding economies. It was about preventing the economic despair that could lead to political collapse. The creation of what would become the European Union was a radical project to bind nations so tightly together that the very idea of a power vacuum within its borders would become unthinkable. Stability became the ultimate prize. This mindset explains so much about modern European foreign policy. Consider the Arab Spring in the early 2010s. While America was often more interventionist, championing the overthrow of dictators, European nations were noticeably more hesitant. Why? They weren't necessarily fans of Gaddafi in Libya or Assad in Syria. But they looked at the situation and asked a chillingly pragmatic question: what comes next? They saw the potential for a massive power vacuum on their southern doorstep, one that could be filled by extremist groups, trigger mass migration, and destabilize the entire Mediterranean region. The fear of a chaotic, failed state was, for many in Europe, greater than their desire to depose a dictator. Look at Libya. The NATO-led intervention, which many European nations participated in, did lead to Gaddafi's fall. But it also led to a decade of civil war, a collapsed state, and a humanitarian crisis that sent waves of refugees towards European shores. For many European policymakers, Libya became a cautionary tale, a perfect example of their worst fears realized. The chaos that filled the void was, in many ways, harder to manage than the predictable evil of the previous regime. This isn't about defending dictatorships. It's about a deep-seated, historically informed skepticism about what follows their collapse. This preference for stability, even a flawed one, extends to Europe's relationship with Russia. For years, many European countries, especially Germany, pursued a policy of engagement. They built gas pipelines and fostered economic ties. Part of this was simple economics, of course. But another part was a strategic calculation based on this fear of the void. A stable, predictable, if adversarial, Russia was seen as preferable to a collapsed, chaotic Russia with loose nuclear weapons, and the potential for unimaginable internal strife spilling over its borders. The nightmare scenario wasn't a strong Russia, but a disintegrating one. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, while celebrated as a victory for freedom, was also a period of immense anxiety for Western European leaders who feared the consequences of such a massive geopolitical implosion. Today, this dynamic is being tested like never before. The war in Ukraine has forced a dramatic reassessment. The old logic of engagement and prioritizing stability above all has been shattered by outright aggression. Europe is now confronting the reality that a stable adversary can also be an expansionist one, and that sometimes the price of stability is simply too high. It has forced a painful but necessary shift in thinking. The continent is now providing massive support to Ukraine, taking a stand for sovereignty even at the risk of greater instability. But even in this new reality, the old fears linger. You can hear it in the debates about the war's endgame. What happens to Russia after the conflict? A decisive Ukrainian victory is the goal, but policymakers in Paris and Berlin are also quietly worrying about the consequences of a total Russian state collapse. It's that same old ghost, the fear of the vacuum, haunting the halls of power. Will a post-Putin Russia be a democracy, or will it fragment into warring fiefdoms, creating a black hole of instability on Europe's eastern flank? This deep-rooted preference for order over chaos is what makes Europe, Europe. It's a continent that has learned from its own bloody history that the devil you know is often better than the devil you do ain't. It's a worldview shaped by the fall of empires and the horrors of total war. While this can sometimes make Europe appear hesitant, indecisive, or overly cautious on the world stage, it comes from a place of profound historical experience. The primary goal is to prevent the continent from ever again sliding back into the abyss of chaos that has defined so much of its past. The entire European project is, in a way, a giant, complex, and ever-evolving machine designed to hold the vacuum at bay. And understanding that is the key to understanding Europe itself. Thanks for watching. If you found this look into the European mindset interesting, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the forces that shape our world. See you in the next one.